When a relationship with a narcissist comes to an end and everything suddenly goes quiet, it's easy to believe the story their silence seems to tell. Thoughtful. You notice the lack of calls, messages, or emotional reactions. Maybe you even see them smiling in photos or appearing to enjoy life, and it feels like they've completely left the past behind. But that conclusion can be misleading. Size. In many cases, a narcissist does not emotionally release someone simply because the relationship has ended. Their inner world functions very differently from that of someone who processes loss in a healthy way. Most people eventually accept a breakup, work through the pain, and slowly let go. A narcissist often cannot do that because the relationship was never built on mutual love or emotional intimacy. Instead, they became psychologically dependent on the attention, admiration, and emotional responses they receive from you. Once that source disappears, what remains isn't heartbreak in the traditional sense. It's a powerful sense of losing control, validation, and influence over someone they believed belonged to them. Rather than seeing you as an independent person with your own identity, they often viewed you as an extension of themselves. Your role was to reinforce their self-image, reflect back the admiration they craved, and absorb the emotional weight they refused to face. When you walk away, stop responding, or refuse to participate in their manipulation anymore, you aren't simply ending a relationship. You're removing the emotional supply that supported their fragile sense of self. That loss creates an internal crisis they are not equipped to handle. Because accepting rejection feels unbearable to their ego, they reshape reality in their own mind. Instead of acknowledging that you've reclaimed your independence, they turn the experience into a painful obsession. Ironically, the more emotionally free and stable you become, the more difficult it becomes for them to let go. When you stop pleading, stop defending yourself, and stop reacting to their behavior, you remove the very thing that once made them feel powerful. Your calmness becomes a reminder that they no longer control your emotions, and your peace reflects the failure of their attempts to dominate you. That realization can become deeply unsettling for them. This fear of losing control often leads to one of the clearest signs that they haven't truly moved on, quietly watching your life from a distance. On the surface, they may tell everyone they've forgotten about you. They may act indifferent if they happen to see you or confidently claim they're happier than ever. But those public displays are often designed to protect their image rather than reveal the truth. Behind closed doors, their behavior can tell a very different story. They may feel an intense need to keep track of your life, especially because they no longer have direct access to it. Instead of openly reaching out, they observe from the shadows. They repeatedly check your social media profiles, watch your stories shortly after they're posted, or search for small clues about what's happening in your world. If directly following you feels too obvious, they may look for other ways to gather information. They might casually question mutual friends, bring your name into conversations to see what others reveal, or even create anonymous accounts so they can continue watching without being recognized. Sometimes the signs become stranger. They suddenly appear at places you frequently visit, seem to cross your path more often than chance would explain, or briefly interact with an old post before removing the evidence moments later. These behaviors are rarely accidental or driven by harmless curiosity. They're often intentional attempts to measure whether they still have an emotional effect on you. Every small action becomes a test. They want to know if you're still thinking about them, if they can still trigger your emotions, or if they continue to occupy space in your mind. What makes this cycle even more frustrating is that the less you react, the more determined they may become. Your silence denies them the validation they seek, leaving them increasingly focused on finding proof that they still matter to you. The more peaceful and emotionally detached you remain, the harder they may work to break through that distance. Then just when life begins to feel normal again, and you're finally finding your balance, they suddenly return. A message appears without warning. They claim to have an urgent problem that only you can solve, or they send what seems like a deeply emotional apology filled with promises of change. This tactic is commonly known as hoovering because its purpose is to pull you back into the unhealthy dynamic you fought so hard to escape. The timing is rarely random. Narcissists often seem to reach out precisely when they sense you're no longer emotionally tied to them and are beginning to build a fulfilling life without their presence. Their return isn't necessarily driven by genuine growth or sincere accountability. More often, it's fueled by the fear of permanently losing access to someone they once believed they could always control. The moment your focus shifts away from missing them and toward building a peaceful, independent life, something changes. A narcissist often senses that they are losing the emotional grip they once had over you. As your confidence grows and your need for them fades, their feeling of control begins to disappear, and that loss can trigger intense panic. To break through your silence, they often craft messages that seem perfectly designed for your emotional weak spots. Suddenly, they sound remorseful, nostalgic, or incredibly loving. They may finally say all the things you waited to hear during the relationship, offering affection, apologies, and promises they refused to give when they still had easy access to you. It can feel convincing, especially if you've spent a long time hoping for this moment, but it's important to recognize what's really happening. A hoovering attempt is rarely about genuine accountability or lasting personal growth. More often, it's about reassurance for themselves. They aren't reaching out because they've learned how to love in a healthy way. They're reaching out because they need confirmation that they still have the ability to influence your emotions. Whether your response is loving, angry, confused, or heartbroken, doesn't matter. Any emotional reaction tells them they still occupy an important place in your mind. When you stop chasing them, stop explaining yourself, and invest your energy in your own future, their inner insecurity often intensifies. Reaching back out becomes one last attempt to pull you across the boundaries you've worked so hard to build. Their goal is to restore the emotional access they once depended on. If those attempts fail and they realize they can no longer control you directly, many narcissists shift their attention toward controlling how other people see you. This is where a smear campaign often begins. Although it may feel like pure hatred, it frequently reveals something deeper. Instead of moving on with their own life, they remain emotionally invested in damaging yours. Someone processing a healthy breakup usually puts their energy into healing and creating a better future. A narcissist may spend enormous amounts of time trying to attack your reputation because your ability to thrive without them challenges the false image they've spent years protecting. Your peace becomes evidence that they were never as powerful as they wanted others to believe. To defend that image, they may rewrite history, spread misleading stories, exaggerate events, or portray themselves as the victim while casting you as the problem. They often project their own unhealthy behaviors onto you, allowing them to avoid responsibility while protecting their fragile self-image. By telling their version first, they hope others will question your credibility if you ever decide to share what really happened. What makes this tactic even more disturbing is that they often watch your response very closely. They want to know whether the rumors are affecting your relationships, whether you're becoming emotionally overwhelmed, or whether you'll publicly defend yourself. A dramatic reaction gives them exactly what they want because it reassures them they can still influence your emotional state. The strongest response is often refusing to participate in the chaos. When you don't argue, chase, or constantly try to correct every false claim, you deny them the emotional reward they're seeking. Your calmness communicates something they struggle to accept, that they no longer control your identity, your emotions, or the direction of your life. Even after you've created distance and begun rebuilding your life, you may notice something unsettling. You unexpectedly run into them at your favorite coffee shop, the gym you always visit, the grocery store near your home, or social gatherings connected to mutual friends. At first, these encounters may seem like harmless coincidences. You may even question your own instincts and convince yourself you're imagining patterns that aren't really there. In some situations, however, these repeated encounters are intentional. A narcissist may use the knowledge they gained during the relationship to predict your routines and position themselves where you're likely to be. These carefully planned appearances aren't necessarily about reconnecting. They're often psychological tests designed to remind you of their presence and interrupt the emotional distance you've created. The possibility that you're genuinely happy without them can be extremely difficult for them to accept. By placing themselves back into your environment, they create opportunities to pressure you emotionally while maintaining plausible deniability. If you confront them or accuse them of intentionally following you, they can quickly dismiss it as coincidence and portray you as overreacting. The real objective isn't simply to be seen, it's to study your reaction. They want to know whether their presence still makes you nervous, unsettled, angry, or emotionally shaken. A moment of visible discomfort, hesitation, or panic reassures them that some part of their influence still remains. Every emotional response becomes evidence in their mind that they haven't completely lost the control they once believed they had. Every sign of discomfort you show becomes emotional fuel for them. It gives them temporary reassurance that they still matter, that they haven't been forgotten, and that they can still influence your emotions. That brief sense of power helps prop up the fragile superiority they've been trying so desperately to protect. The moment you truly stop looking back, invest in yourself, and begin creating a peaceful, fulfilling life, their behavior often changes dramatically. Many people expect a narcissist to finally lose interest and disappear once they've clearly moved on. Instead, it's common to see the opposite. As they recognize that direct control is slipping away, they may become louder, more dramatic, and far more reactive than before. Unable to reach you through direct contact, they often shift their attention to public displays designed to capture your attention. Social media becomes a stage where every post serves a purpose. Suddenly, their profiles are filled with carefully crafted images of a perfect life. They may introduce a new romantic partner almost immediately, posting excessive displays of affection and presenting the relationship as if they finally found everything they ever wanted. At the same time, they may begin showcasing achievements with unusual intensity. New purchases, vacations, career milestones, expensive gifts, or exciting experiences suddenly appear everywhere. Some posts may even include quotes, jokes, or subtle references that seem intentionally designed to trigger your insecurities, make you question yourself, or tempt you into comparing your life with theirs. If you witness this performance, it's important to understand what may actually be driving it. These displays often reveal less about genuine happiness and more about a desire to regain attention. Your emotional healing has removed the validation they once depended on, and your ability to move forward challenges the belief that they still hold a permanent place in your life. When you no longer center your world around them, they lose the position they once expected to occupy. Your confidence and emotional stability become reminders that they no longer control your thoughts or your future. For someone who struggles to accept that loss of influence, creating emotional reactions through public displays can become another attempt to restore a sense of importance. As a result, they may continue testing your boundaries in subtle and obvious ways. They may post things they hope you'll see, make indirect comments, or create situations designed to distract you from your progress. The goal is often simple: interrupt your healing and prove they can still affect your emotions. When they realize you've completely closed every direct path back into your life by blocking their number, refusing contact, and maintaining firm boundaries, many won't simply walk away. Instead, they may begin reaching you through the people around you. Without direct communication, they often rely on mutual friends, acquaintances, coworkers, or even relatives to gather information. They may casually mention your name during conversations, ask innocent-looking questions about your life, or express curiosity about whether you're dating someone new, how your career is progressing, or how you're coping after the breakup. In many cases, the people answering these questions have no idea they're being used. They believe they're simply having a normal conversation, while the narcissist quietly pieces together updates about your life. These individuals unintentionally become sources of information, allowing the narcissist to stay connected without contacting you directly. Silence creates uncertainty, and uncertainty is often extremely difficult for a narcissist to tolerate. When they no longer know what you're thinking or feeling, they lose access to the emotional certainty they once relied upon. That lack of information can become deeply uncomfortable, motivating them to search for answers wherever they can find them. Using other people also allows them to avoid personal risk. They don't have to face rejection or respect your boundaries because someone else becomes the bridge between you. At the same time, they know that news often travels both directions. If they ask a mutual friend about you, there's a good chance that friend will eventually tell you, "Your ex asked how you've been." Even hearing that message can be enough to place them back into your thoughts for a few moments. For a narcissist seeking reassurance, knowing they briefly occupied your mind again may feel like a small victory, reinforcing the illusion that they still hold significance in your life. The silence that follows the end of a relationship with a narcissist often looks like closure from the outside. But beneath that silence, a very different psychological process may be unfolding. Healthy people eventually accept that every relationship has a beginning, a middle, and an end. They may grieve, reflect, learn from the experience, and slowly move forward. A narcissist, however, frequently struggles with accepting an ending that they did not control. For them, complete separation can feel far more threatening than simple loneliness. It represents the loss of influence over someone they once believed they could shape, manipulate, or rely on for emotional validation. To a narcissist, being completely removed from your life can feel like becoming irrelevant. Since their self-worth is often heavily dependent on outside validation rather than inner stability, irrelevance becomes deeply frightening. It is not simply about missing a former partner. It is about losing a source of attention that reinforced their identity. This is why many narcissists refuse to disappear entirely. Instead of walking away, they often remain on the edges of your life, indirectly monitoring you through mutual friends, social media, shared acquaintances, or occasional unexpected appearances. These subtle forms of contact allow them to reassure themselves that they still occupy some place in your thoughts. Another common pattern is the constant rewriting of the past. Instead of reflecting honestly on what happened during the relationship, they often reconstruct the story in ways that protect their self-image. Rather than acknowledging manipulation, dishonesty, emotional abuse, or neglect, they may convince themselves and others that they were actually the victim. Every disagreement becomes your fault. Every consequence becomes evidence that they were misunderstood. Every painful memory is altered until it fits the version of themselves they desperately want to believe. This behavior serves an important psychological purpose. Accepting responsibility would force them to confront painful feelings of shame, insecurity, and personal failure. For someone with strong narcissistic traits, those emotions can feel almost unbearable. Instead of processing those feelings, they reshape reality itself. They may repeatedly insist that events never happened the way you remember them. They might tell you that you're exaggerating, being too sensitive, or remembering things incorrectly. Over time, they often repeat these revised stories so frequently that they begin believing them themselves. That is why conversations after the relationship often become so frustrating. You're trying to discuss facts while they're trying to defend an identity. Those are two completely different conversations. No amount of evidence is likely to change someone's mind if admitting the truth threatens the image they've built of themselves. One of the healthiest responses is refusing to participate in endless debates about the past. Every argument gives the narcissist another opportunity to reshape the narrative, provoke emotional reactions, or regain psychological control. Silence removes that opportunity. Refusing to argue does not mean you accept their version of events. It means you've recognized that proving your reality to someone committed to denying it is rarely productive. Ironically, your refusal to engage often increases their frustration. When they no longer receive emotional reactions, they lose one of the primary rewards that kept the cycle alive. They may intensify their efforts, repeating the same accusations, revisiting old conflicts, or attempting to draw you back into conversations that should have ended long ago. Their goal is often less about resolving the past and more about keeping the emotional connection alive, even if that connection is based entirely on conflict. It's important to understand what these behaviors do not mean. They are not reliable signs of love. They are not evidence that the relationship was secretly meaningful in a healthy way. They are not proof that the narcissist suddenly recognizes your value or wants to build a respectful partnership. More often, these behaviors reflect unresolved issues surrounding control, validation, and emotional dependency. Many survivors mistakenly interpret persistent contact as evidence of deep affection. They assume that someone who cannot let go must truly love them. However, genuine love respects another person's freedom, boundaries, and well-being. Obsession seeks possession. Love wants the other person to thrive even after separation. Control cannot tolerate losing access. What the narcissist often misses is not necessarily your personality, your kindness, or the memories you shared together. Instead, they miss the emotional role you played in maintaining their internal stability. They miss having someone whose reactions they could predict, influence, and use to regulate their own fragile self-esteem. They miss the reassurance that came from knowing they could still affect your emotions whenever they wanted. When they see you healing, becoming more confident, creating new routines, and living peacefully without them, it can create a powerful emotional reaction. Your independence reminds them that the influence they once held no longer exists. That realization can produce attempts to reconnect, provoke you, spread rumors, or indirectly monitor your life. These behaviors often stem from difficulty accepting that someone they once controlled has genuinely moved beyond their reach. This is why emotional detachment becomes so powerful. The less energy you spend analyzing every message, every social media post, every rumor, or every unexpected encounter, the weaker their influence becomes. Narcissistic dynamics often survive because the former partner remains emotionally invested in understanding every confusing behavior. Once that investment ends, the cycle begins losing its power. Many people spend months or even years waiting for closure. They hope for an apology that finally acknowledges the pain they experienced. They imagine one honest conversation where the narcissist accepts responsibility and validates everything they went through. Unfortunately, that moment often never comes. A person unwilling to face their own behavior is unlikely to provide the emotional resolution someone else deserves. Real closure usually comes from within. It begins when you stop expecting the narcissist to explain your experience back to you. Instead of waiting for validation from the person who caused the confusion, you begin trusting your own memories, your own judgment, and your own healing process. You recognize the unhealthy patterns for what they were without minimizing them or making excuses. Creating your own closure means accepting that not every story ends with mutual understanding. Sometimes the healthiest ending is simply recognizing the truth, learning from it, establishing firm boundaries, and choosing not to return. It means understanding that your peace no longer depends on someone else's apology or approval. As you continue healing, something remarkable happens. The narcissist's behavior gradually becomes less important than your own growth. Their attempts to provoke you lose their emotional impact. Their opinions no longer define your reality. Their stories no longer determine your identity. Instead of constantly asking, why are they doing this? You begin asking, how can I continue building a healthier life? That shift changes everything. Your attention is one of the most valuable resources you possess. Every moment spent decoding their actions is energy that could have been invested in your own recovery, relationships, goals, and happiness. The moment you redirect that attention back toward yourself, you begin reclaiming your emotional freedom. Eventually, you realize that the narcissist's ongoing obsession says far more about their unresolved struggles than it does about your worth. Their inability to let go reflects their own dependence on control, not the depth of their love. Meanwhile, your ability to move forward demonstrates something much healthier: resilience, emotional growth, and the capacity to build a life that no longer revolves around someone else's manipulation. In the end, the greatest victory isn't proving them wrong, exposing every lie, or making them understand what they did. The greatest victory is reaching a place where their behavior no longer determines your emotional state. When you stop chasing answers, stop seeking validation from the person who harmed you, and fully embrace your own healing, the toxic cycle finally loses its grip.
That is genuine freedom. It's the moment you recognize that your peace never depended on changing them. It depended on reclaiming yourself. Once you understand that, their attempts to pull you back into old patterns become little more than echoes from a chapter you've already chosen to leave behind.